Chapter 1. The Arousing of Thought. Among all the convictions formed in my common presence during my responsible, peculiarly composed life, there is one conviction, an unshakable one, that people, whatever the degree of development of their understanding, and whatever the form taken by the factors present in their individuality for engendering all kinds of ideals, always and everywhere on the earth feel the imperative need, on beginning anything new, to pronounce aloud, or if not aloud, at least mentally, that particular invocation, understandable to even the most ignorant person, which has been formulated in different ways in different epochs, and in our day is expressed in the following words: in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen. That is why I also, in setting forth on this venture, quite new for me, namely authorship, begin by pronouncing this invocation, and pronounce it not only aloud, but even very distinctly, and as the ancient Thulusites used to say, with a fully manifested intonation. Of course, only to the extent permitted by data already formed in my whole presence, and thoroughly rooted in it for such a manifestation. Data, by the way, which are generally formed in man's nature during his preparatory years, and which later, during his responsible life, determine the character and vivifyingness of such an intonation. Having begun this, I can now be quite at ease, and should even, according to contemporary notions of religious morality, be completely assured that from now on, everything in this new venture of mine will proceed, as is said, like a pianola. In any case, this is the way I have begun, and how the rest will go, I can only say, as the blind man put it, we shall see. First and foremost, I shall place my hand, moreover the right one, which, although at the moment it is slightly injured due to an accident that recently befell me, is nevertheless really my own and has never once failed me in all my life, on my heart, of course also my own, but on the constancy or inconstancy of this part of my whole I see no need to expatiate here, and frankly confess that I myself have not the slightest wish to write, but am constrained to do so by circumstances quite independent of me, though whether these circumstances arose accidentally or were created intentionally by extraneous forces, I do not yet know. I only know that these circumstances bid me write, not just some trifle for reading oneself to sleep, but thick and weighty tomes. However that may be, I begin. But begin with what? Oh, the devil. Is there indeed being repeated that strange and extremely unpleasant sensation I happened to experience about 3 weeks ago, while I was composing in my thoughts the scheme and sequence of the ideas I intended to publish, and did not know then how to begin either? This sensation I could only describe in these words: the fear of drowning in the overflow of my own thoughts. To stop this disagreeable sensation, I might still have had recourse to that maleficent property inherent in me, as in all contemporary people, which enables us, without experiencing any remorse of conscience whatever, to put off anything we wish to do till tomorrow. I could have done this very easily, because before beginning the actual writing, there seemed to be plenty of time, But today this is no longer so, and cost what it may, even though I burst, I must begin. But begin with what? Hurrah! Eureka! Almost all the books I have happened to read in my life have begun with a preface. So, I too must begin with something of the kind. I say of the kind because in all my life, from the moment I began to distinguish a boy from a girl, I have never done anything at all as it is done by other biped destroyers of nature's bounty. Therefore, I ought now, and am perhaps even bound on principle, to write not as any other writer would. In any case, instead of the conventional preface, I shall begin, quite simply, with a warning. Beginning with a warning will be most judicious on my part, if only because it will not contradict any of my principles, whether organic, psychic, or even willful. At the same time, it will be quite honest. Honest, of course, in the objective sense, since I expect without the least doubt, as do all those who know me well, that owing to my writings, there will entirely disappear in the majority of readers, immediately and not gradually, as sooner or later must occur to everyone, all the treasures they have acquired, either by inheritance or by their own labor, in the form of quieting notions that evoke only marvelous images of their present lives or naive dreams about the future. Professional writers usually begin such introductions with an address to the reader full of all kinds of bombastic, magniloquent, and, so to say, honeyed and inflated phrases. In this alone I shall follow their example, and also begin with an address to the reader. But I shall try not to make it as sugary as they usually do with their evil wiseacring, by which they titillate the sensibilities of the more or less normal reader. Thus, my dear, highly honored, strong-willed, and of course very patient sirs, and my very dear, charming and impartial ladies, forgive me. I have omitted the most important, nay, in no wise hysterical ladies. I have the honor to inform you that although, due to circumstances that have arisen in one of the later stages of my life, I am now going to write books, during my whole life I have never written a single book or instructive article or even a letter in which it was necessary to observe what is called grammar, so that although I am about to become a professional writer, I have no practice at all in the established rules and procedures or in what is called bon ton literary language, and am therefore constrained to write not as ordinary patented writers do, to whose forms of writing you are in all probability as much accustomed as to your own smell. In my opinion, what will be troublesome for you in all this is chiefly that in childhood there was implanted in you, and has now become perfectly harmonized with your general psyche, an excellently working automatism for perceiving all kinds of new impressions, thanks to which blessing you have now, during your responsible life, no need to make any individual effort whatsoever. To speak frankly, I personally see the central point of my confession not in my lack of experience in the rules and procedures of writers, but in my ignorance of what I have called the bon ton literary language, required in contemporary life not only of authors, but even of all ordinary mortals. As regards the former, that is to say, my lack of experience in the rules and procedures of writers, I am not greatly disturbed. And I am not disturbed because in the life of contemporary people, this lack of experience is in the order of things. This new blessing arose and is flourishing everywhere on earth thanks to an extraordinary disease which for the last 20 or 30 years, for some reason or other, has afflicted all those persons from among the three sexes who sleep with half-open eyes and whose faces are fertile soil for the growth of every kind of pimple. This strange disease is manifested thus. If the invalid is somewhat literate and his rent is paid for 3 months in advance, he, she, or it inevitably starts writing some instructive article, if not a whole book. Knowing all about this new human disease and its epidemic spread on earth, I naturally have the right to assume that you have acquired immunity to it, as the medical experts would say, and that you will therefore not be too indignant at my lack of experience in the rules and procedures of writers. That is why I make the center of gravity of my warning my ignorance of the bon ton literary language. In self-justification, and also perhaps to lessen the disapproval in your waking consciousness of my ignorance of this language, indispensable for contemporary life, I consider it necessary to say, with humble heart and cheeks flushed with shame, that although I too was taught this language in my childhood, and although some of my elders who prepared me for responsible life constantly forced me, without sparing any means of intimidation, to learn by rote the host of nuances that in their totality compose this contemporary delight. Yet, unfortunately, of course for you, of all that I learned by rote, nothing stuck, and nothing whatever has survived for my present activities as a writer. And if nothing stuck, it was not through any fault of mine, or of my former respected and non-respected teachers. This human labor was spent in vain owing to an unexpected and quite exceptional event that occurred at the moment of my appearance on God's earth, at which moment, as a certain well-known European occultist explained to me, after very minute, what are called psycho-physico-astrological investigations, through the hole in the window pane made by our crazy, lame goat, there poured vibrations of sound from an Edison phonograph in the neighbor's house, while the midwife who delivered me had in her mouth a lozenge saturated with cocaine of German make, moreover, not ersatz, which she was sucking to the sound of the music without the proper enjoyment. Aside from this event, rare in the everyday life of people, my present situation came about because later on in my preparatory and adult life, as I must confess, I myself surmised, after long reflection, based on the method of the German professor Herr Schrumpfenschausen, I always, both instinctively and automatically, and sometimes even consciously, that is, on principle, avoided using this language for intercourse with others. And I manifested myself thus in regard to this trifle, perhaps not such a trifle, thanks to 3 data formed in my entirety during my preparatory age, about which data I intend to inform you in this first chapter of my writings. However that may be, the fact remains, illuminated from every side like an American advertisement, which cannot now be changed by any forces, even with the know-how of the experts in monkey business, that I, who have in recent years been considered by many people a rather good teacher of temple dances, have today become a professional writer, and will, of course, write a great deal. As it has been proper to me since childhood, whenever I do anything, to do a great deal of it. Nevertheless, not having, as you see, the automatically acquired and automatically manifested practice needed for this, I shall be obliged to write all I have thought out in the plain, simple, everyday language established by life, without any literary manipulations or grammatical wiseacrings. But the pot is not yet full. I have still not decided the most important question of all, in which language to write. Although I have begun to write in Russian, nevertheless, as the wisest of the wise, Mullah Nasruddin would say, in language, you cannot go far. Mullah Nasruddin, or as he is also called, Nasr ad-Din Khoja, is little known in Europe and America, but is very well known in all the countries of the continent of Asia. He is a legendary personage, corresponding somewhat to the German Till Eulenspiegel. Many popular tales and sayings are attributed to this Nasr ad-Din, some of long standing and others more recent, all expressing life wisdom. The Russian language is very good, cannot be denied. I even like it, but only for swapping anecdotes and for referring to someone's parentage. The Russian language is like the English, which is also very good, but only for discussions in smoking rooms while settled in an easy chair with legs stretched out on another. The topic of Australian frozen meat, or perhaps the Indian question. Both these languages are like the dish known in Moscow as solyanka, into which goes everything and anything except you and me. In fact, everything you wish, even the after-dinner chesma, or veil of Scheherazade. It must also be said that owing to all kinds of conditions, accidentally or perhaps not accidentally formed in my youth, I have had to learn very seriously, and of course always with self-compulsion, to speak, read, and write a great many languages, and to such a degree of fluency that if, in following this profession unexpectedly forced on me by fate, I decided not to take advantage of the automatism acquired by practice, I could perhaps write in any one of them. But in order to make judicious use of this automatism acquired by long practice, I would have to write either in Russian or in Armenian, because during the last 2 or 3 decades, the circumstances of my life have been such that I have had to use just these 2 languages for communication with others, consequently have had more practice in them. Oh, the devil. Even in a case like this, one of the aspects of my peculiar psyche, unusual for a normal man, has already begun to torment the whole of me. And the torment I feel at this moment, at my almost too mellow age, is derived from a property implanted in childhood in my peculiar psyche, with a lot of other rubbish unnecessary for contemporary life, that automatically compels the whole of me, always and in everything, to act only according to popular wisdom. In the present case, as always when I'm in doubt, there has just slipped uninvited into my brain, which is constructed in such an annoying way that I am driven to despair, that saying of popular wisdom which existed in very ancient times and which has come down to our day in the following words: every stick has two ends. In trying to understand the underlying thought, real meaning hidden in this strange formulation, any more or less sane thinking man will, in my opinion, soon come to the conclusion that all the ideas contained in this saying are based on that truth recognized by people for centuries, that every phenomenon in the life of man is due to two causes of opposite character and divides into two exactly opposite results, which in their turn become the cause of new phenomena. For example, if something obtained from two opposing causes produces light, then this something must also inevitably produce the opposite phenomenon, that is, darkness. Or again, if a factor engenders an impulse of palpable satisfaction in the organism of a living creature, it likewise inevitably engenders dissatisfaction, of course also palpable, and so on and so forth, always and in everything. Adopting here this example of popular wisdom, formed in the course of centuries and expressed by the image of a stick, which, as was said, has indeed two ends, one end considered good and the other bad, then if I take advantage of the mentioned automatism acquired by me through long practice, it will, of course, be very good for me personally, but according to this saying, for the reader, it will be just the opposite. And what the opposite of good is, even every non-possessor of hemorrhoids can easily understand. In short, if I exercise my prerogative and take the good end of the stick, the bad will inevitably fall on the reader's head. This may indeed happen, for in Russian it's impossible to express the, so to say, niceties of philosophical questions, which I intend to touch upon in my writings rather fully. Whereas, although it's possible to do so in Armenian, this language, to the misfortune of all contemporary Armenians, has now become quite impractical for expressing contemporary notions. In order to assuage the bitterness of my inner hurt owing to this, I must say that in my early youth, when I became interested in philological questions and was deeply absorbed in them, I preferred the Armenian language to all the others I then spoke, even including my native tongue. This language was my favorite at that time, chiefly because it had its own character and had nothing in common with the neighboring or kindred languages. All its tonalities, as the learned philologists say, were peculiar to it alone. And as I understood even then, it corresponded perfectly to the psyche of the people of that nation. But during the last 30 or 40 years, I have witnessed such a change in this language that although it has not completely lost the originality and independence it had possessed since the remote past, it has now become a sort of clownish potpourri of languages whose consonances, falling on the ear of a more or less attentive and conscious listener, sound like a collection of Turkish, Persian, French, Kurd, and Russian tones mixed with other indigestible and inarticulate noises. Almost the same might be said about my native language, Greek, which I spoke in childhood, and the taste of whose automatic associative power I still retain. I could, I dare say, express anything I wish in it even now, but it's impossible for me to employ it here for the simple and rather comical reason that someone must transcribe my writings and translate them into other languages. And who could do that? It can be said with certainty that even the best expert in modern Greek would understand simply nothing of what I would write in the tongue I assimilated in my childhood, because during the last 30 or 40 years, my dear compatriots, inflamed with the desire to be at all costs like the representatives of contemporary civilization, even in their conversation, have treated my dear native language just as the Armenians, anxious to become Russian intelligentsia, have treated theirs. The Greek language, whose spirit and essence were transmitted to me by heredity, and the language now spoken by contemporary Greeks, are as much alike as, according to the expression of Mullah Nasruddin, a nail is like a requiem. So, what is now to be done? Ah, me. Never mind, esteemed buyer of my wiseacrings. As long as there is plenty of French Armagnac and Kaiserian, I shall find a way even out of this tight corner. I'm an old hand at this. In life, I have so often gotten into difficult situations and out of them that this has become almost a matter of habit with me. Meanwhile, I shall write partly in Russian and partly in Armenian, all the more since among those people always hanging around me, there are several who know how to get along more or less easily in both these languages, and I somehow entertain the hope that they will be able to transcribe and translate them fairly well for me.